Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where we are shaping the future of training and development. Today, I am joined by a special guest, Ernesto Gómez, who is the VP of Human Capital at Grupo Alpha, a major Mexican conglomerate with more than 83,000 employees, before becoming the Chief Human Resources Officer at Sigma Alimentos, a global consumer packaged goods company with 43,000 employees. Ernesto has incredible experience to share. Welcome to the show, Ernesto.
Hello, Jay. I'm very happy to be with you.
So you have had an incredible career. I mentioned a couple of those different spots, but I want the audience to get to know you. So how did you get into this, human capital, this HR, this training and talent development space, Ernesto?
Looking in hindsight, I don't know how really things things just kind of got organized in certain way because my intention was never to be in the human capital space. Actually, I ran businesses. I started small, as an independent, had about 15 different businesses throughout my career, and then I got into consulting, and a company uh, hired me to turn around an operation that was in bad shape. And it was my contract was for 6 months, and we were able to turn it around, and that converted into a 23-year lifespan on different roles. At first, many of my roles were head of businesses, and at some point I was the business that was $1.3 billion in revenue. So
Mm,
it was a large business.
yeah.
And for some reason, the CEO of the company thought it would be a good idea to have somebody that had experience in the trenches to, you know, oversaw the human capital function. I was also at the time, very critical about, how the HR was, performing. And he said, well, since have so many opinions and seem to be unhappy, why don't you take over and see if you can do better? And
I love it.
that, quite frankly, that turned out to be my calling. I'm so happy that that happened. I mean, I just retired. The positions that you mentioned, of course, were the positions that I held in the last few years. I retired about a year ago to look for some other projects. I just changed venue, and but ever since I was in HR, actually, my first challenge was in talent development,
Mm.
specifically in succession planning. So the challenge that I had in front of me was very intimidating for me because this is a large company, uh, 50 years old more or less when I was there at the beginning, and people had long tenures, and many of the key positions were going to be refilled just because were retiring.
Hmm.
Got into work at their 20s, 40 years after they are in their 60s, and so you need to plan for that. And the challenge was major. At the moment, when I took over, in the next 5 years, the same amount of people that have retired in the whole lifetime of the company were going to be retiring. And we needed to fill up at about 140 positions uh,
Wow.
in different, layers. Uh, and of course, the pipeline gets to be complicated because you start kind of moving the the pyramid, and then things open up real quick. So we
That's
needed to
that's a
have
that's a scary proposition to have to replace 140 leadership positions right around the same time.
absolutely, absolutely. So
What was going through your before we go into that? What was going through your mind when this challenge was presented to you? I mean, it had to be something where it was like, "Hey, Ernesto, this is what we're facing right now." What did that feel like?
I was really intimidated. Of course, I have always have a lot of, drive, and I'm a businessman at heart. So I look at this as a challenging proposition, but somebody that I wanted to, prove me into this. Uh, and there was one pivotal moment because at some point I was really in my office saying, "What am I going to do with this?" Right? No
Yeah.
experience. I was, I had a good team and people that were knowledgeable. In the end, I was, calling the shots. So I was in my office saying, "What am I going to do about this?" And also keep in mind that I'm not an HR person at
Hmm.
heart. But an idea occurred to me so I could reframe the problem. And my reframing was, well, I might not be an HR specialist, but what if I see this challenge as an innovation problem in HR? So I said, I'm the innovation guy in charge of HR. So if I use that mental model, what would I do different so that I could, tackle this major problem? And I started saying, well, I know how to innovate because I ran businesses before, and I just started, opening up and finding out uh, partners and people who could kind of guide me along the way. And also, having been in a leadership position myself, I knew that the most important part that we were going to be training for was not functional skills. Yes, it is important to have functional skills and to have them updated as much as you can, but it was much more about strategy and vision and
Yeah.
a lot of soft skills, because when you are up in the ladder, most of the time you are dealing with strategy, people, you know, market trends, things that require a perspective taking
Yeah.
and judgment. So I say, how do I go in that way? And to make a long story short, we did a lot of segmentation and it turned out to be okay. 100% of all the C-suite occupants today were part of the program. So I think it worked.
Wow. That's an incredible ratio.
Yeah.
100% of your C-suite is from this program. You
Yeah.
know, the interesting thing, and congratulations on your retirement, by the way. That's pretty awesome. And I'm glad to see that you're not giving it up. I'm going to go back and ask a question about this in just a moment, but I
Yeah.
want to stick with this succession because I find this super interesting. So, a lot of times when people are taking on a new position and maybe they're moving from salesperson to sales manager to sales leader to sales VP, each of those different levels, just to exactly what you said, requires a different mindset, requires a broader look at the organization. The tactical skills that we had at one level are not necessarily going to translate as you move up that leadership. You're going to have better visionary skills, better people leading skills, management skills, etc. What was the experience for you as you started to think about like, okay, we're putting 140 people. This is going to be a fast track leadership exercise. How were you preparing them to essentially think on that larger level?
Oh, well, first of all, as I was mentioning to you, some of the things that I've learned being in business is that if you don't have a good segmentation to understand, because these 140 people were part of, different levels from the very top to uh, I wouldn't say medium because it was all of them were business unit, either leading functions or geographies or something that took a lot of responsibility.
Hmm.
But you can tell, how many of those were technical experts, how many of those were emerging leaders, how many were more senior that were ready to step up for the next big deal. So by doing that and kind of understanding where they were at that moment, we kind of figure out the gaps and the things that we needed to work with them. Uh, and we had two levels, one more personalized predominantly with the more where the more responsibility was needed, uh, and so where we had to do not only specific programs that we partnered with universities, but also much more of a coaching and mentoring space with them. And then as you kind of open up a little bit more, uh, we figure out that talent portability is very tricky And
Hmm.
I know this from first-hand experience because you can have very talented person and you move it in, a different team, different processes, maybe network supports, and it gets to be different from where they used to be. So you have to prepare for, the unexpected, a lot of resilience, and many of, I would say, the ability to network for them was also critical.
Yeah.
So, quite frankly, what I did is, we separated. We did a program that we called multi-university, where we had four of the most important universities in the world, talking about Wharton, Stanford, Chicago Booth, and London Business School, working with us, with our senior leaders. Then we had another program with Stanford to work more with the emerging talent. Then we had another one with MIT, also with uh, for the more of a technical experts that were going to be, taking more leadership positions. So they were functional experts, and all of a sudden they needed to oversaw some broader functions, and also some coaches, and mentors, targeted specific groups. So we engineered a system that took, approximately 4 to 5 years, you know. So and we did a lot of evaluations, progress evaluations with them, and also with the universities. And as I was saying, we I think we did well.
Yeah.
Interesting. Two-thirds of all the participants throughout the program had promotions,
Wow.
and
66%. That's
yeah,
great.
two-thirds, 60%,
Yeah.
and 25% of that 60% had more than one promotion. So
Nice.
it may be, two or even three along the way. And you could probably say, well, of course, Ernesto, you picked good people to begin with. So, of course, you trained them, and they were kind of geared towards making progress. But we also measure the performance evaluations of all of them. And broadly, in general, we had about a 10% increase in their performance evaluations too.
Hmm.
So that meant that, they were making progress. They were good, and they became better. Uh,
Yeah.
so those, I would probably recommend, design a framework, because that's what we needed. We had a specific framework, to be going. For instance, with the more senior leaders, we had a 4 piece framework. The first part was setting the goal and defining a plan, and then we had another model of working with and through others. We had another one that had to do with uh, uh, intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. And then we had another one which was called selling the idea.
Hmm.
So combining those models and partnering with different experts, I think that turned out to be okay. Uh, Up until this time, and I mentioned to you that I retired a year ago, I still have acquaintances that tell me how much they missed, those opportunities. Of course, the company had money to invest. I
Yeah.
have to recognize that it was a major decision, and they decided that it was worthwhile. So uh, that helped a lot. But in the end, it's a lot. It's a big responsibility because you only get to do that once. I mean, you cannot fail. It's a lot of money, and then of course, if you fail, there is no way to redo what you did wrong.
Right.
So I had
Well,
also a good team.
yeah, and so that was going to be the next question that I had for you is I'm thinking about this and I'm trying to think about, the audience. They may be in a large organization, they may be in a smaller organization. How did you segment to start off with? Did you segment just by level? Did you segment more of, hey, here's the list of 2000 potentials. How did you get through that to determine what is the better person or who's going to qualify to get into this training program? Like what was that process?
It's an excellent question because in my position, I couldn't have a way to go to the very detailed, elements
Right.
into how a person is selected. So what we had is like, sessions with the HR partners, that were close to those people, and they also had some, of course, a clear idea of who were the the individuals that had the potential to begin with, and we did a lot of work with them, setting out like a criterion so that we could have a common view among business units into which what we were going to evaluate. And then we also had a final decision made by the CEO of each of the business units,
Mm,
because as much as you can do pre-work and kind of select people, then you get to a point where you say, well, this is the group of person, the people that you're going to be betting on. So tell us what you think.
yeah.
So we had a final go or no go by the senior leader of each of the business units. Uh, and kind of we started with very simple questions. If some of these people were about to leave the company, would you be comfortable them leaving the company or not?
Mm, that's
I
a
mean,
great question.
yeah, because they will say, just imagine somebody wants to take him, from you. What would you do? Say, no, 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 no way. So that told us something, right? And
Yeah.
when we saw like, well, he's a good guy, but I can do without. So that's not a good idea. You're not going to be part of a program. And
That's a
and
that's a brilliant question to ask though, is how much does this person mean to you? How much would you do to save this person? And that's going to give you a good idea of whether or not that's a really clever way to think about that. I like that.
yeah, and in the end, of course, you see how they have skin in the game, right? Into
Hmm.
making the decision. It's not just corporate bringing people into a program. It's just something that was going to be a more strategic for them as well.
Yeah.
So we did all that. What was quite frankly difficult for us is that are we going to open up that this group of people are participating in a program? What about those who are not attending? What kind of ill will may this generate or not? And also when you uh, start to groom somebody, some people feel like I made it, and they
Mhm.
stop making the best effort they can. So what we did is like saying, well, we are developing a talent pool, and people get into the talent pool and exit the talent pool at any moment. So it's up to those who are in the talent pool to remain there, or maybe somebody who's doing a very good job end up participating there. So it's not really a decision where nobody will ever get here if you were not selected first. And if you were selected, of course, you knew that if you don't kept on doing your best, you may end up exiting the talent group. So
So there
that was
was a level of competition almost inside of there of, hey, you've made it this far, but your seat's not guaranteed. You need to keep earning, keep working, and keep pushing in order to keep going here. That's an interesting concept to add into that space as well.
and also because people need to have ownership about how bad they want to be there, how to begin with, because it's a big investment
Yeah.
of time, of resources, and it's a lot of people involved behind the scenes. So we wanted to make sure that it was people appreciated this. They didn't feel entitled. On the contrary, they were, and also we of course were open to this is what we're trying to do. If you want to complement this by yourself, if there's some other things that you have in mind, you may go and take them on your own, or probably we can talk about that and see if we can support you. But it became a project, uh, as I mentioned to you, where the conviction from people, you know, both in those who participated and leaders of the companies were very important. And we measured a lot. We shared results with the business leadership a lot, how much we were progressing, just to keep the interest going because it's a long time.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes, businesses go, but there's another thing. I had a budget, uh, and businesses some have good and bad years or just mediocre years. So we didn't want to stop when when they had headwinds and then retake it because you lose momentum.
Yeah.
So we separated the budget for the whole program at the beginning.
Okay.
So there was a big economic commitment from them as well.
Well, and that's interesting because I know that a lot of my L&D folks experience that of, hey, it's a good year. We've got this amount of money for programs, and the next year is not so good. And oh, wait, we've already invested into a new LMS and invested into this, and now what are we going to do? Do we have to drop? So it's smart that you were able to get that investment up front to make sure that this would be a continuity of programming. I did have a question, and I'm thinking about this, right? Like when you're looking at 140 leaders in a secession plan, I've got to imagine that there was probably some surprises. And what do I mean by that? Hey, I'm looking at Ernesto, and Ernesto is my front runner for the CEO position. Definitely. And then all of a sudden, maybe that doesn't happen, or somebody else steps in. What was that like? Did you have a lot of surprises where maybe there were some people that you expected to go higher and didn't? Or maybe some people that barely got in and then really showed that they belonged there and went further? What was that experience like, and how did you navigate some of those maybe surprises as they came up?
Well, excellent question. First, one of the things we measured, during the program and at the end was the churn in terms of because some people ended up leaving, but we had a churn below 3%.
Mm,
So, so most of them remained in the company, and just a very a few left the company. And then the other thing is that for me, it was frustrating and also uh, uh, very self-critical of what we were doing. If you ended up training a person that didn't make it, but it's like everything in life. You're not gonna hit 100%
right.
of of all the things that you do in life. A baseball at the bat, which is has a 400 score, means that fails 60% of the time, and still is considered to be on the top of the game. So in this moment, at some point in time, we said, well, the, we're gonna do as thorough as comprehensive screening process in the beginning, but then we have at some point in time to let go because if you don't, you start kind of frustrating, and it's a mind thing. Am I doing right? Is this going to work or not? And as I say, measuring and keep on evaluating progress gave us an idea, to what extent we were doing a good job or not. And some of them ended up remaining, as I mentioned to you, two-thirds didn't get a promotion, two-thirds got a promotion, but a third didn't.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so
that's
it,
still an incredible 60% of your participants walking into a promotion, at least one promotion. And it sounds to
yeah,
me like you said 25% ended up getting multiple promotions or anything else. That's a pretty compelling stat. And especially, I don't know how many people started in the program, but if you're looking and saying 140 people ended up moving into these leadership positions, you've got to say at least 200 people at that point in time. The return on investment for even impacting 140 top level leaders at your company, it's exponential. The amount of, I think the most recent data out is one underperforming leader can cost your organization up to $126,000 a year. So if you take 140 leaders that you had elevated into these positions and you were able to 10% of that is 14, that's $1.4 million return on investment year after year after year. So I love that you were quantifying the impact of mobility, as well as longevity, as well as, I mean, that complexity is really, really smart. I'm a big fan
yeah,
of that.
yeah. We had well, not about, we had 300 people in the group. So to
Okay.
fill up 140 positions, we ended up
Yeah.
training 300 people. And also we measured, for instance, in the case of the MIT, we had a very interesting and I would say very, very profitable program with them because they even portray that as a success story. It's in the MIT webpage. Uh,
Nice.
because we ended up uh, developing projects with them that had a return. So
Mm,
we not only trained the people who participated, but we made a few $1 million just from those participants. And so they ended up paying their own training and left some residual. And I'm saying measured by projects that they,
yeah.
efficiency projects or whatever, uh, on top of what talent brings you. Uh, what I have seen at least and that I've read is a talented CEO explains about 20% of the value created by the company. So you can have a plus 20% or minus 20% value, you know, just related to how a CEO is performing.
Hmm.
20%,
That's a big swing.
it's a big swing, and you had it, when you think about the how a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement works, you increase the top, the say the revenue by 20%, and you keep your expenses, in place. Uh, the value creation, the profits are amazing because there is a lot of absorption of what you do. So pretty much it goes all the way to the bottom line.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of money that you can create, and even for me, as I was uh, before I got into this program, heading this effort, I went to a executive session myself with some colleagues of mine, and as a result of that, we made some changes in the strategy of the business unit I was heading, and we also created a lot of money. So there is tangible resources that you can produce by betting on your talent, and you cannot afford not to have good talent these days.
I want to stick with this topic for a second because I find it to be really, really interesting. And what I'm referring to is the opportunity to pair real world, real impact projects alongside of the training programs. And I'll share a little bit, where this is coming from. So, one of the programs that I've worked on at Wayne State University for the better part of 2 decades was the Engineering Management Master's Program, which was a partnership between Ford Motor Company and Wayne State. And actually, MIT consulted on this program back in 1995. So, just to give you some longevity of this, but this program runs the last year of the program is all about a leadership project, in which case, these high performing, high talented engineers who are getting their master's degree take on a real world problem. And one of the impacts of this has been that these projects have actually saved, over the course of 30 years, over $1 billion in cost savings and revenue generation for the organization. What I don't see, Ernesto, is any L&D groups, right? I'm not seeing L&D groups implement something where there's real world projects or real world challenging projects for, okay, I'm delivering a communications training. Now, what are you going to do with it? Or I'm delivering this conflict resolution training. Now, what are you going to do with it? What project are you going to take on? Can you talk a little bit maybe about what was the experience in incorporating these real world projects and what made them successful? Because I think every L&D person out there would go, wait a second, I can incorporate a project that ends up paying for my budget that covers the cost of these things. Like that's a very novel concept. So you've got experience in this. I've got experience from the university side of things. Talk to me about your experience in those projects and what did that look like?
The funny thing is that at the beginning, I didn't want to do it. Uh,
Mm.
I went to MIT and I met just outstanding individuals, Steve Eppinger, Kurt Chilton. I mean, these guys are first class. And as we were designing the program, they suggested to do projects. And I was resistant to that because I said, you know what, I haven't seen that work in the past. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's being a waste of time. People are really busy doing their jobs, and then they have a program that is part of the university that's not going to work. I was just very negative about that. And as I was explaining my position, they were saying, well, we have something that we call men and manus, which it means hands and thinking. So we are very familiar with that. That's our ethos at MIT. And I was still, resistant. And they paused for a minute and say, "You haven't worked with MIT, haven't you?" I said, "No." Well, we make these things happen. And I saw them so convinced that I said, I'm going to give it a try. And I
Sure.
was I was humbled by that. Say, well, and are you going to make it work? So what they came up with it was a three model parts where uh, at the beginning of each of the models, uh, together with the program, certain groups gathered and started to uh, figure out what things that they saw at their organizations that needed to be fixed and that probably could return an interesting amount of money. And they also ran a kind of an evaluation of those, and through a framework that they have in terms of what are the steps that you have to follow from the detection of the opportunity up the way up into the implementation and how you measure through. They decided, well, we're gonna figure out how to do this. So we had three sessions, and in first session you decided on the programs, and then they also had a call in between sessions
Mm.
where they evaluated each group, on their progress, what problems they were facing, etc., so that in the next session they would share, findings and where they were doing different. And then in the third model, they presented the results. So all in all, we had about uh, three groups or three cohorts where they were in presence, and then about two or three times more where they were following up on the progress of each team. So this guy, they had a lot of supervision, and so it's not just like figure out a project and then make it work and see what happens. It was a follow-up process
Yep.
from people that are very knowledgeable about how to do these things work, and they have they also are tough guys. I mean, they don't take no for an answer. And when they say, I didn't make a lot of progress, well, shame on you. You have to do better. So they applied a little bit of pressure. And I mean, a good partner makes a big difference.
Huge.
And that's why I was so happy about that. And actually, that's why they suggested to use this as a success story in MIT because it really worked.
Yeah.
I mean, there were at the moment where we've measured the results, I don't know, $6-7 million that we end up capturing, but those projects continue delivering value.
Yeah.
So 5 years after that, I don't know how much money they have produced, but it's a lot.
Well, I love that you bring this up, Ernesto, because I think at this point in time, the EMMP has generated 172 different leadership projects at Ford, all cohort based, so like 3 to 5 people per team. Some of them very, very impactful, some of them less. But a couple of things that I think that you said are so important. So if you're listening and you want to run some kind of project, one thing I heard you said was stakeholder buy-in. And that was something that we learned early on at Wayne State University is, okay, it's great that this engineering team is doing this project. Who does this get handed off to? Who has responsibility for it afterwards? What is your implementation? And actually in the EMMP program, I can tell you there's an entire semester that is dedicated to a project management course that is related to setting up the scope of a project, what it's going to entail, what it's not going to entail. And by the time that they get to their year actually executing the project, gathering the data, etc., I mean, their scope is so well determined, so narrowed, so defined, and there's already buy-in from senior executives that are saying, when this project comes to conclusion, this is how we're implementing it. I heard you say something similar. It sounds like they were having to
Yeah,
report up, they were getting the buy-in early on. So by the time that the project come to conclusion, there was no surprises. It was like, yeah, this is here and it's ready to go type thing. Is that what I'm understanding from you?
absolutely, absolutely. And for projects to work, you have to be very thorough in the way you implement and the way you measure and the way you share, progress. Uh, uh, and I would say that at least in my case, I was negative because I didn't see that work before,
Hmm,
and it was because I didn't work. I haven't worked with MIT
sure.
before, so these guys were very good, and I would say just find the best partners that you can get, and the projects are gonna be successful and they're gonna return your investment. I'm sure about that 100%.
Well, and I think it's very wise to make sure that, hey, do we have a partner who's actually done these types of projects before, who has experience, who's, after 30 years of Wayne State doing it, it's buttoned up. There's five different faculty that all oversee different aspects of it. I mean, it runs like clockwork, and I imagine that's got to be what MIT is doing as well, where it's just, hey, we've been there, we've done that, we've seen this. And now it's just a question of can we execute or can the people engage in that? So let me ask you one other question. Uh, as it relates to the participants that were doing these projects, because you said you at first you had some resistance and it was like, these people are busy, they don't have time to do this, that, and the other thing, and I don't know what the return on investment is. What was the experience like, I guess, getting buy-in from the participants to say, yes, let's take this on? And how did you paint a value proposition for them, being able to say, we're doing real world impact, we're doing this or anything else? Did you see any resistance from the participants? Like, I'm already busy and you're making me do X? Or did you, what was that sort of motivation level of the participants in general?
Well, first of all, as we presented, the first day that we were, you know, uh, kind of kicking off the project, that was included as, a very important part of the process.
Hmm.
And also it was uh, kind of very well explained that this allowed them to get practical knowledge about how to make things happen in the long run throughout their careers and in the
Mhm.
company. So it was an opportunity more than a hustle. So you say, you know what? I mean, you may go to have a very good session and hear about fantastic ideas from MIT, but this time you want to have the opportunity to be guided by an expert. So if you learn about this, you will be able to apply it. So the why behind what is what is in for me, it was clear that they will be trained also, in that part. Uh, of course, life is hectic and throughout the program they had also many responsibilities. Uh, but they looked up to Steve and to Kurt, so they respected their knowledge. They knew they were, MIT faculty, so
You're
they
right.
they don't kid around. And they also, slowly but surely got engaged themselves into this. So it was not really an imposition. It was more seen as an opportunity for them to continue their growth. I think that framing helped. And also the fact that we said that in the end, they were gonna be presenting their findings to the CEOs of their own companies. So it's your chance to shine in front
Yeah.
of them and show them what you were capable of doing. So that also really was a carrot, so to speak, and not only sticks to motivate people. Positive reinforcement, I think, goes a long way, and there was a lot of pride in that.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's the combination, and just being close to them and kind of hearing what they, if they hustle for a reason why, and kind of get them energized.
I love that. It's the same. It's been my experience as well. It's like, wait a second, I get to do a project that's going to have a meaningful impact on the company, and I'm going to get to present this in front of senior leadership or participate and engage with senior leadership on a quarterly, monthly, weekly, bi-weekly level. Yeah, I'm in. So I was wondering if the experience was the same on that. So, Ernesto, you've had an incredible career. You've had a lot of success. You've authored a book called Regrowth. Can you tell me a little bit about the book and what the frame is for that book?
Well, throughout my life, as you were saying, I've seen a lot of business problems and transformation, and the initiatives going place. And one of the things that really motivates me a lot is to find out how can you unlock potential in people, because I'm a firm believer that people have a lot of potential that is just waiting to be tapped. And if you create the right conditions in the team and of course throughout the company, that happens. And I wrote this book, Regrowth, because if you take a short-term perspective on failure, and sometimes when you get stalled, you kind of see only that things didn't work out. But if you take a long-term perspective, it's just a step in the process. It's just you're never, life is not a 45-degree ascending line all the time. It's not that way. No business creates value that way. Even us as individuals are not really that way. So regrowth, it's a title that reflects that you can recalibrate, and you can, when you stall, you can regrow. It's just the fact to, put in place the right levers to make it happen. So I wrote this book on business transformation. And pretty much what I define is on the talent density level, what is it you have to do in the company? On the cultural level, what you have to do in the company, and also what kind of collective mindset you have to really pursue so that you get into this regrowth pattern. I don't know if you know this, hasn't been really documented scientifically, but uh, 50, I mean, the amount of performance that people leave in the table, it's more or less 40 to 50%. So you can double your productivity. It is amazing. I've interviewed many CEOs throughout my life, and I asked them this question: what makes your people, what percentage of potential are you getting from your people? In other words, actual performance versus potential. And they tell me, 40, 50%, I'm sure they can do better. So what do we have to do to help them do better? Because it's not just applying pressure. It's just, potentially something that you have to work with your people to unlock. And that's why I wrote that book, to kind of share my experience in doing that, and and to show what has worked for me and maybe it can work for somebody else.
I love that perspective. The title caught regrowth. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. So, audience, it's available on Amazon. You can check that out. We'll make sure that a link to it is in the show notes. Author is Ernesto Gomez. So, I have one more question for you. I know that we're, here towards the end of our time, but I do have one question for you. You retired last year,
Yeah.
and I'm curious. I would love to know just from our conversation, I can tell you are somebody that loves to help. You are somebody that loves to be challenged. What was your experience in sort of this retirement? And then obviously now you're leading a consulting organization. You're obviously doing great work with other people. Like, what was that transition like for you, stepping out of the corporate sphere and more into your own space? You had mentioned you'd already been a serial entrepreneur previous to this, so I imagine it wasn't too scary. But what was that transition like for you, Ernesto?
Being in HR, one of the things that I learned is that you have to avoid identifying with your position's title. I mean, you are not your position. You're a person who has talents and performs. Because when you retire and you lose that position, it doesn't mean your identity is lost. And it's very hard for retirees to accept that they are no longer, such and such title, and you have some other opportunities. And in the book, actually, in chapter 8 of the book, the last chapter, I kind of share my personal transformation experiences so that, things happen that lead you in a different way and how you can regrow yourself into doing that at the personal level. And one of the things that I'm very clear about is what I'm here to do. What I'm here to do is to help individuals and organizations to get unstuck, renew themselves, and unlock potential to thrive in an uncertain world. So that's my definition of what I'm here to do. And based on that, I take each and every opportunity to either if a company needs my help, as a consultant, or maybe an individual, I have to mentor or coach or whatever. I get, what is this, where are you stuck? Because you have to solve that first. If you don't get unstuck, it's very difficult to perfect everything else. And then how the next step, how you renew. Because the most important problem of any organization is renewal. That's the villain in organization is stiffness. And
Hmm.
you end up doing the same thing over and over again. So you have to renew. And then, of course, once you start that renewal process, how you maximize that untapping potential, and really get proficient into doing more of what serves you best. And that's what I'm a firm believer in that. And I want to devote the next 10, 15 years of my life helping individuals and organizations. That motivates me a lot.
Well, Ernesto, I can tell that you have definitely helped some individuals today by being here with us, sharing your story and these incredible just way that you approached some major challenges and the insights that you're able to share. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and to share some of these insights and your knowledge and experience. This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation that I've learned a lot from, and I know that our audience is. So I can't say thank you enough for being here. If our audience wanted to get in touch with you, how would they reach out to you?
Well, I'm in LinkedIn, Ernesto Gómez, and I go by my second last name because we Latins used to last names. It's Arzapalo, Arzapalo, Ernesto Gómez Arzapalo. So you can, get in touch with me there, or you can go to my webpage, aspenmindset1.com, and we can engage there. So I'll be more than happy to get in touch with your audience and see if I can help in some way. That's what I want to do actually.
I love it. Well, thank you, Ernesto, for being here. We'll make sure that those links are in the show notes so that way people can find you nice and easy. But again, I just want to express my gratitude for your perspective, for your time, your energy. I can tell that you are just an incredibly passionate person about this and definitely an innovator. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Jay. It was my pleasure. I really appreciate you inviting me to your podcast.
Absolutely. So, and thank you, audience, for tuning into this episode of the Talent Forge, where together we are shaping the future of training and development.